The Tonight Show studio was alive with energy. The house band played their signature tune. The audience clapped in rhythm, and Jimmy Fallon bounced onto the stage with that infectious smile everyone knows. It was supposed to be just another Tuesday night, another celebrity interview, another round of laughs and stories. Jamie Lee Curtis sat across from him, relaxed, poised, ready to promote her latest project. She'd done this 1,000 times before. So had Jimmy. They had their rhythm, their banter, their professional chemistry. The cameras rolled. The teleprompter scrolled. Everything was perfectly orchestrated. Then it happened. A sound. Just a simple sound through the studio speakers. And Jamie Lee Curtis froze. Her smile vanished. Her eyes widened. Her hand instinctively moved to her chest as if trying to hold something inside that was suddenly breaking free. Jimmy noticed immediately. The practiced showman in him paused mid-sentence. The audience, still riding the wave of laughter from seconds before, didn't understand what was happening. But Jimmy saw it. He saw her face change. He saw the color drain. He saw a woman who had spent decades mastering the art of public performance suddenly become completely, utterly vulnerable. What happened next would become one of the most talked about moments in late-night television history, because Jimmy Fallon did something that broke every rule of live television. He stopped the show. Jamie Lee Curtis had arrived at 30 Rock that afternoon like she always did. Professional, punctual, prepared. Her publicist had briefed the producers on talking points. The new film, her family, maybe a funny story from set, standard stuff, safe territory. She'd sat in the green room, scrolled through her phone, sipped water from a branded NBC bottle. This was routine. She'd been doing press tours since before some of the crew members were born. The Tonight Show was friendly territory. Jimmy was easy to work with. There was nothing to worry about except Jamie Lee Curtis was carrying something that afternoon. Something she hadn't told her publicist about. Something she hadn't even fully processed herself. 3 days earlier, she'd received a phone call. The kind of call that stops time. Her childhood friend, the one she'd known since they were both awkward teenagers trying to break into Hollywood, had passed away suddenly, unexpectedly. The funeral was scheduled for the weekend. But the press couldn't stop. The contracts were signed. The appearances were booked. So Jamie did what professionals do. She compartmentalized. She put on the armor. She showed up. The interview started normally. Jimmy asked about her career, her family, her experiences in Hollywood. Jamie delivered perfect answers with perfect timing. She was a master at this game. The audience loved her. Jimmy laughed at all the right moments. The segment was going exactly as planned. Then about 8 minutes in, one of the producers decided to play a clip, a montage of Jamie's most iconic film moments set to music. It was meant to be a celebration, a tribute to her incredible career. The music started and Jamie Lee Curtis shattered. It wasn't the images on the screen. It was the song. A piece of music she and her late friend had obsessed over during the filming of their first movie together back in 1981. They played it in the trailer between takes, sang it badly at rap parties, made it their unofficial anthem during those hungry, hopeful years when they were both nobodies dreaming of becoming somebodies. Jamie hadn't heard that song in over a decade. She'd forgotten it even existed until that moment. Until it came flooding out of the studio speakers and dragged her 40 years into the past. Her hand trembled. Her breathing changed. Jimmy saw it all happening in real time. The audience was still watching the screen, still applauding the montage, still completely unaware that something profound was unraveling right in front of them. But Jimmy knew. Years of interviewing thousands of people had given him a sixth sense for human pain. He could see she was drowning, and he made a choice. He stood up. The band stopped playing mid-note. The audience fell silent. Jimmy walked around his desk, something he rarely did during interviews, and moved toward Jamie, not as a host, not as an entertainer, as a human being. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't try to crack a joke to ease the tension. He didn't do any of the things his training told him to do. He just sat down next to her and waited. Jamie looked at him, tears now streaming freely down her face, and whispered something the microphones barely caught. That song. I haven't heard that song since. She couldn't finish. She didn't need to. Jimmy reached over and gently took the handheld microphone from her shaking hand. He set it down on the desk. Then he did something that would define his career more than any joke, any sketch, any viral moment ever could. He took off his tie. It sounds like a small gesture, symbolic, maybe even theatrical, but anyone who knows Jimmy Fallon knows what that tie represents. It's the uniform, the costume. the barrier between Jimmy the person and Jimmy the performer. Taking it off in the middle of a live show was his way of saying, "This isn't a show anymore. This is real. I'm here with you, not as a host, as a person." The studio stayed silent. 300 people holding their breath. Millions watching at home, frozen on their couches. The producers in the control room debating whether to cut to commercial. But Jimmy shook his head at the cameras. Not yet. This moment mattered more than the schedule, more than the sponsors, more than the format. This was why television existed, not to entertain, to connect. Jamie took a shaky breath and began to speak. She told the story of her friend, the girl who slept on her couch when neither of them could afford rent. The woman who'd held her hand through her first panic attack on a film set. The sister she chose, not the one she was born with. The person who knew her before the fame, before the awards, before the carefully constructed public persona. And how that person was gone now, just gone. And Jamie had been so busy being a professional, being strong, being on that she hadn't let herself feel it, until that song played, until the armor cracked, until she couldn't hold it anymore. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Jimmy listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't redirect, didn't try to fix the moment. He just listened. And when Jamie finished, when the words ran out and only the tears remained, he did something that no one expected. He asked the audience to do something with him. He asked them to honor Jamie's friend. Not with applause, not with sympathy, with silence. 30 seconds of complete silence. In a television studio on live TV where silence is the enemy, where dead air is a producer's nightmare, where every second is monetized and measured and managed. Jimmy asked for silence, and 300 strangers gave it to him. The cameras kept rolling. The clock kept ticking. But for 30 seconds, The Tonight Show became something else. It became a memorial service. It became a grief space. It became a moment of collective humanity in an industry that usually trades in superficiality. You could hear Jamie's breathing slow. You could see her shoulders drop. You could watch in real time as someone who'd been performing for 72 hours straight finally found permission to stop, to feel, to be broken. When the 30 seconds ended, Jimmy didn't crack a joke. He didn't pivot to commercial. He didn't do any of the things that hosts are supposed to do. He looked directly into the camera and said, "If you've lost someone, if you're hurting, if you're pretending you're okay when you're not alone, and you don't have to perform. Not even for us." Then he turned back to Jamie and asked her quietly, almost inaudibly, "Do you want to keep going or do you want to stop?" It was the question a friend asks, not a host. And Jamie, readied and raw and utterly without pretense, smiled for the first time since the music started. "Let's keep going," she said. She would have wanted us to keep going, so they did. But everything was different now. The interview that followed wasn't polished. It wasn't perfectly timed. It was messy and real and human. Jamie told stories about her friend that made her laugh through tears. Jimmy shared his own experiences with loss. The audience, no longer spectators but participants, offered their own silent support. The band played softly in the background. And for the remaining 10 minutes of the segment, The Tonight Show wasn't a show at all. It was a conversation. The kind of conversation that happens at 2 a.m. when the masks come off and people tell the truth. Behind the scenes, something remarkable was happening. The producers, initially panicked by the deviation from script, started receiving messages, texts from viewers, emails, social media exploding, but not with complaints, with gratitude, people sharing their own stories of loss, people thanking Jimmy for creating space for grief on a platform usually reserved for laughter. People saying they'd never felt so seen by a television show before. The segment ended not with applause, but with Jamie and Jimmy standing together, his arm around her shoulder, her head briefly resting against his. The camera held on them for an extra beat. Then finally, they cut to commercial. In the break, Jamie hugged Jimmy so tightly that his shirt wrinkled. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for letting me be a mess." Jimmy just nodded. No words needed. When the show aired that night, it broke the internet. The clip went viral within hours. Not because it was funny, not because it was scandalous, but because it was true. People saw something they rarely see on television. Genuine human emotion met with genuine human compassion. No performance, no agenda, just two people being real in a medium built on illusion. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The next morning, Jimmy's tie, the one he'd taken off and left draped over his desk, was still there. The crew had left it untouched, almost reverential. One of the producers suggested framing it, turning it into a memento, but Jimmy shook his head. He took it home instead, not as a trophy but as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the best thing a host can do is stop hosting. Sometimes the best thing a performer can do is stop performing. Sometimes the job isn't to entertain. It's to witness, to hold space, to say, I see you. I'm here. You're not alone. In the weeks that followed, Jamie Lee Curtis would attend her friend's funeral, deliver a eulogy that made everyone cry, and begin processing her grief in healthier ways. She'd send Jimmy a handwritten letter thanking him for that night. She'd tell reporters in subsequent interviews that it was one of the most important moments of her career, not because of what she said, but because of what she was allowed to feel. For Jimmy Fallon, the moment became a turning point. He'd always been known for his impressions, his games, his ability to make people laugh. But that night, he showed something deeper. He showed that entertainment doesn't have to be escapism, that television can hold grief as well as it holds joy, that the most memorable moments aren't always the funniest ones. Sometimes they're the most human ones. The tie never went back in rotation. Jimmy kept it in his dressing room, hanging on a hook next to a photo someone had taken that night. Him. And Jamie mid-moment surrounded by silence and witnessing. He'd look at it sometimes before shows, especially on nights when the script felt too rigid, when the schedule felt too tight, when the performance felt too fake. And he'd remember the show can stop, the format can break, the rules can bend because people matter more than programming. Truth matters more than timing. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do on live television is absolutely nothing at all. Years later, journalism students would study that episode in classes about authenticity in media. Psychology professors would use it as an example of public grief and collective healing. But for the people who watched it live, who stumbled across the clip online, who shared it with friends who were hurting, it was simpler than that. It was proof that even in our most polished, most produced, most carefully managed spaces, there's still room for breaking down. There's still room for truth. There's still room for a host to become a human, for a show to become a sanctuary, for a sound to unlock a grief that's been waiting, patient, and persistent, for permission to finally be felt. That night, The Tonight Show didn't just make people laugh. It made them cry. It made them feel. It made them remember that underneath all our performances, all our professional masks, all our carefully curated public personas, we're all just people carrying losses, honoring memories, trying to stay whole when parts of us are missing. And sometimes all we need is someone to take off their tie, sit beside us, and let us fall apart.